numbers are moving. It has 6 hours.
Cool. So I'm sure we'll short out any minute now.
Well, it's just funny.
There we go. Testing.
And I think this is like 18 or 19. That was way more than I thought last time.
Yeah. Well, good.
Yeah.
Was last week's 2 or 1?
It was an hour, so
Yeah.
I left it at 1. I could break it up into 2.
That probably makes sense. So today we are talking about stages of development, human stages of development, and
The
of course,
sperm and egg unite and make a zygote. And then cell division.
not just the physical. Yes, not just the physical, but the you could kind of think of this as a spiritual journey. Although I don't use that term for this.
Is it psychological development? I mean, it's because it's not like, I wouldn't be facetious, it's not biological development. We're just
Right.
not talking about
Yeah.
that. But yeah, it's
Yeah, so there's a lot. So what we're going to talk about specifically today is the work of Sean O'Leary. He's a former Catholic priest that I like to check in on his work quite a bit. And he actually has 23 stages that we pass through.
too many.
And although I think once we get into this, you'll appreciate him.
Sweet.
And he calls this very specifically the Ascension Project, from God's womb to God's heart. And of course, if this is worth saying every single episode, if this is the first time you have ever watched this, don't get caught up in the word God. Mm-hmm. It's more complicated than you think, more complicated. You can think any word that you want to use there, the Tao, the Great Mystery, anything like that works. For me, I think this is a good place for me to start, because my terminology, and I do not remember off the top of my head the researchers that use this term or whoever uses it now, maybe it's a current thing that they use it, is developing, the person develops from an egocentric center, basically, thinking about themselves, to an ethnocentric, to a world-centric, and then that could go on to a cosmocentric. Is there something beyond that? Maybe. That'd be fine. And it could actually, you could even argue that it would start below egocentric, but I think for our sake, most people that would be listening to this can relate. Like egocentric, you're very self-centered, you're very thinking about yourself, you're selfish, you're not putting others' needs first.
A 3-year-old.
Yeah, in any manner. Yeah, in any manner. And then on to the ethnocentrics, that's where you're going to start spreading your concern, right, out to your family, your community, maybe your school, and then to your country, certainly, which, of course, where patriotism can get caught and stagnate then. And then on to world-centric is thinking that, they're taking concern for every human on Earth.
Yeah.
And or it might start there with Cosmo, and you could think of Cosmo is that every being, every entity is worthy. So that's like a simple 4-stage model that I think is...
It's a good number.
Yeah, it is a good number. And of course, anytime you divide anything by, as soon as something becomes more than 1, it becomes infinitely dividable, right?
Right.
It's like when we talk about Don Miguel Ruiz Jr.'s the 5 levels of attachment. Like, well, you could split that into 5 more levels very easily if that's what you wanted to do.
Are you a lumper or a splitter? And so,
yes,
so that ethnocentric thing, that's like your tribe. Like you go from being one individual person in the world to seeing that there are indeed other people in the world, but it's only the people that are like you.
Right.
At that stage. And then the moving from there to world-centric is, even this guy over here that has a loud, obnoxious truck that I may not particularly be too fond of, they're also in my group. And I have to make some room for that.
Right.
That's a pretty massive leap there.
Yeah, and a lot of people, so most of the world probably by percentage, 70, I think it's something like 70%, is ethno or below.
Or below.
At best. Yeah, ethno at best. So that's pretty interesting. Mm-hmm. An interesting, another way to think of this, besides egocentric to ethnocentric to world-centric, to cosmocentric is a 4-stage model of thinking that so from someone's birth to approximately 7 years old, they are just have like self-awareness in terms of you're just reacting to the environment like themselves.
Yeah, right. Sure.
7 to 12, roughly. These ages aren't like set in stone. But would be self-regulation, where you start modifying your behavior based on the conditioning that is being handed down to you, right, of good or bad, right? So you're self-regulating. You're starting to make decisions on that.
Yeah, you're applying the rules and norms that you've been taught in your own on your own accord.
Right, yeah. And then, of course, there's, in theory, an authoritative, probably adult unit or units at that time, the parental units or
well, and it starts
whatever.
to become internalized, right? Whether those people are present or not, they're omnipresent.
Yep. And then 12, you start becoming self-reflective, learning rules and roles very specifically, and then kind of deciding which way to do.
Yeah, and maybe going against the norms that you've been taught.
And then a potential 4th stage then is self-transcendence, which I think most people get to at least to a degree. It might be quite later in life, but the realization that they're just much more than the ego, you know, basically. And there's more to life than just taking care of yourself and even the people right around you. I think one important thing to think about all this is in these stage developments, the highest possible, or anytime you're above a stage, you would know not to attack the stage below you.
Right, there's no punching down.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're punching down, then you're probably not as high as
you're not where you thought you were.
You're not as high as you.
So you would say it's impossible to punch down, because if you think that's what you're doing, you're actually punching laterally.
Yeah, right, man. Yeah. So
what's really interesting about that, but just to interject, is I remember, I guess probably a major milestone for me, and maybe this is sort of in one of these transitional stages, is recognizing that my parents were people.
Okay.
You know, like in saying, oh, they're not just what I perceived them to be. They have a whole life. You know, they were my age. They have their own problems. That they're not just the part of them that's in a relationship with me.
Right.
And that's that I have. And you know, so that's me being able to see past the part of it that influences me and to open up for, and that just happened spontaneously. And I think that's something a lot of people, if not everybody, goes through at some point, is just sort of realizing that these relationships you've had in childhood aren't just the people aren't on the earth just to serve whatever your relationship with them is.
Right.
So that's a good
well,
thing.
and I think so that early stage, that mother typically, not always, but I mean typically the mother especially, but is like just an extension of the human baby body, right?
Yeah,
like,
that's why. Yeah,
like
we've
mom,
been told that multiple times, because Ren, our 6-year-old, is so clingy to Kathleen. And I remember my therapist and several other people have said they don't know that they're not the parent,
right?
They don't, or the mom, until they're like 2.
Yeah,
that's a subdevelopmental stage within that
sure
early ego.
Yeah,
you don't even have the ego yet, right?
This will be really cool because you have Ren at 6. So it's kind of like very current on these super early stages.
I certainly think about it.
So that will be interesting. So Sean's thing, Sean O'Leary, former Catholic priest, he kind of thinks all of these as sacraments, which again, I know the word sacraments can kind of, make you just, and some people, they're just going to turn off like it's very religious term or whatever. But I think he kind of has the right idea that these are like a rites of passage in your life, right? It's more to it. And I think so one thing, one of the things that appeals to me about this is when you see someone that maybe just graduates college, as an example, and they're in their kind of first job, and they're they take the job because they think that's what they have to do.
Checking off the box.
Yep, they're checking off the box. And then they realize, and they're no longer, so for a long time, they got to be a student. They were an elementary student, they were a junior high student, they were a high school student, they were a college student, maybe even worked on their master's. Like, you get to call yourself something, and that's like your checkbox for everybody in the world. Like, well, I'm in school.
Yeah.
Right?
And your time is planned. You've got a schedule, you got classes you got to take. Maybe even your next couple of years are planned out. You don't really have to think about it.
Right. And then all of a sudden, you're just in the world, and and for lots of reasons, we don't have another level of growth that we talk about.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah, it's like, well, you're done.
You've achieved.
Yeah.
Now you just repeat.
Yeah, now you just repeat.
And then you die, and then we don't even talk about old age. God forbid we even mention the fact that we,
Yeah. So Sean's definition of sacrament, I think, too, a lot of people can relate to, minus the word sacrament, is the very mindful ritualization of the significant shifts in both status and responsibility, which would be obligations, in the wider community, not just a family or tribe, but the global community. So it's like that's what the sacraments represent. So like in a lot of like Christianity, there's like the 7 sacraments, very specifically that they broke that in. So these different kind of point being the different models of development, can be a lot of ways to think about it, and there might be a way that you think about it already. Sean's 23 is obviously very thorough. And some of them, I think, are going to be like, well, that's not really something that I believe to be true or whatever. But it's probably then, it might not be true, but also you might not know the answer to why that is if it's not true. So It's like, well, it might be true, But again, it's not worth getting caught up in that.
Yeah.
That's not.
Is like rite of passage sort of a analogous term to sacrament, or is it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's it exactly. In fact, rites of passage totally. Yeah.
Okay.
That's perfect.
So that's I don't think.
Yeah. So without further ado, so I think the first couple would be interesting for a lot of people, and this is where they might be like, la 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 la.
Welcome Jesus Christ into your life.
So number 1 is that there is God, the whole, the one big thing, and that God self-fractures. Okay, so this would be in the beginning. This would be the Big Bang, right? So there's one big whole, and that has to fracture to experience itself in any other way.
Well, that's fascinating because that sets up the whole collective individualism dichotomy.
Yep.
That we're both things at the same time.
Right.
And I didn't realize how difficult it is. That in and of itself is hard for a lot of people to believe, accept, acknowledge, consider. Anyway.
Yeah, well, it's a very interesting aspect, and I think once you grasp that there is one big whole that you are undeniably part of, no matter what you call it, it doesn't matter what you call it, you're part of that whole, and that's why nothing can be outside of that whole. So you can't say that, well, there's God and then the physical world whole. It's like, well, that whole would be all of that.
Yeah, there is nothing.
It's like whatever. So, and that can be complicated, but that is realistic there. Okay. And then so your experience, this is like getting ahead, but you are a fractal of that.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
But you define it in individual terms because we have these 2 lenses, one that sees the barrier of our skin as being as separating us, even though it doesn't really separate us. It doesn't at the same time. Again,
right.
That's the hard.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's like just the beauty of the whole dichotomy.
And that's that. But that's that. You have to go there first, and I think that's appropriate that he puts that first. Like, all right, if you don't believe in this, then none of the other stuff's going to make any sense.
But the thing is on that, people, it's not even a matter of, so people would get caught up into believing in God, right? Because that makes that a separate entity, but it's the God as the whole. And that's hard to grasp because you're so conditioned, especially within a religion framework, as God is this dude. Right? You know what I mean? I always talk about that, like the whole Simpsons episode. Like one time God has like 3 fingers and one he has 4. He's like an old guy with a beard.
The literal metaphor.
Yeah.
But I also think it's, and as much as it might be hard for people to use the word God because they're not into that, it's also just difficult for people to look outside of themselves. Like what I read a lot of is sort of this, Elon Musk and all these other successful people, there are these individuals that have achieved successes in life because of their individuality. So for them to think outside of the fact that I built this wealth, I made these things happen, that's a hard pill to swallow for people because they buy into this idea that we only, exist in the context of success and that sort of financial growth and wealth or power or whatever as these rugged individuals. And so to consider for a moment that any other forces may have influenced us, like luck or being born white, they can't consider that. So there's a different sort of, or I see a different, and as much as like you see God as being an issue for a lot of people, I see simply just not wanting to believe that we're anything but an isolated individual as being a huge barrier for people to hear this.
Well, that's just that's almost like the truest definition of or commonly accepted form of ego, right?
Yeah,
like,
right.
It's like you have a gigantic ego,
but it's so big that there's no room for there, and it's almost as insulting to somebody to say that you're not the center of the universe as it is to say there is a God. Right? It doesn't have to have anything to do with God. It could just be to merely suggest that the world doesn't revolve around you. And I don't even want to say that in like a self-centered way, but I guess you're right. That is like the most extreme expression of ego.
Yeah, well, no man's an island, right? I mean, that's
just the fact that energy, we have to eat food
meaning all
and
people.
Poop it out. We're not isolated.
Right.
Anyway.
Yep. Yeah.
So that's hard for me to sort of resolve.
The second one might be hard for a lot of people to grasp, but the second one is then the individual soul, so the fractal. So you had the one big hole. The fractal volunteers for incarnation. That's the second one.
Oh, wow. To come into existence is some sort of a choice.
Yep. And so then those souls, so we're using the term soul as fractal. Soul, fractal, same thing.
Yeah. What an individual,
the soul, the fractal,
person,
yep, do volunteer, create the experiences of God. So in order for God to experience, for the whole to experience itself, it has to have volunteers of incarnation to be a physical being within that.
Wow, that's a whole episode.
Yeah, that's a lot. Well,
go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, for me, the interesting thing on that is that does come up in past life regression stuff a lot, where people like this idea comes out of them.
Right.
So it's like,
oh, that's cool.
Okay.
So it has like a, wow.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, on the one hand, first thing I think is, so I don't ever have to choose to recognize my individuality or my fractalness. I can stay in the one big hole and just say, this is what I am. I'm not going to acknowledge the fact that I am an individual.
Yeah, well...
Is it a choice or is that a forced step?
Well, as a physical... I think, though, it's a forced step because as a physical incarnation, you need to do what you just said. Mm-hmm. You need to participate in life.
Right, and the one big hole needs you to do that.
Yeah, the one big hole,
so it's
right,
like
because right. And so you have to, at very least, eat, right, or whatever. And even if that's... Yeah, I mean, like you have to participate in it. And so just by being in it, you have to participate.
The nature of the design of our bodies requires that you
participate.
Separate.
You're participating.
And wow, that's cool. And that's all that's saying. It's like,
Yeah. Okay, so that's, and I get where that's a tough one. Like, we're volunteering because, of course, now some people would probably tell you that they can remember lives before lives. I don't know, somebody like Sally, who's Sally, not Sally Struthers, Sally, you know what I'm talking about? Oh gosh, I can't think. But anyway, she talks about like past lives, like it's like she just remembers them. Maybe she does.
Yeah, right.
Maybe she does. Yeah. Okay, so the third one then, this is also, I think, for a lot of people, it'd be tough to accept, is that basically there's a launching pad, in Sean's terms, that the souls, the fractal, are jumping into in incarnation, and that there would be more dimensions than just here on Earth. There is more to it than that.
Yeah. So the
Okay.
one big hole includes the
And yeah,
universe.
stuff way beyond us.
Sure,
we
why
we have
not?
no idea. Why not? Yeah, I don't know.
Makes
That could
perfect sense.
be.
You have to consider that.
Yeah,
scenario
you
in
do.
order for it to
And
be-
also then, I mean, it like depending on like what that all means, it's well, and of course there'd be people that say they could see spirits here. I mean, it could be
yeah,
right
yeah.
here too,
Well,
literally.
and that fits in with my unknowable.
Right.
The idea that
Yes.
we sort of have to build in this term and just sort of say up front, hey, there's a whole bunch of stuff we probably can't even perceive. And so we have to put that in here just to recognize the fact that there could be a lot of stuff going on that we don't understand.
Right. Yes.
Because
yes.
this list is coming at least mostly from the ego.
Right.
It's not like the one big hole called Sean up and said, okay, here's the deal.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think in his, what I can say is in his case specifically, and again in a lot of past life regression stuff, this stuff all comes up.
Yeah, no,
The
I'm totally
volunteering,
open
yeah.
to there being individuals who do have a direct line to understanding fully what's going on.
Yeah.
But I think for normally that's probably not the case.
The
There's
one,
some-
not to digress off this, but the one thing that I always find interesting is from a lot of Christian perspective, they would just be like, well, no, there's not like past lives, there's no reincarnation, blah, blah, blah. But they might accept like the book of like, the one was called like Heaven is for Real. There's some other titles that are escaping me right now, and it's just like, so this is acceptable just because it falls in your framework of what you believe, but this isn't acceptable. But it's really the same. It's talking so close about the same things. It's like, listen, man, you don't know.
Yeah, if you could back up a little from
Yeah.
the literal part and see the metaphor.
Yeah. Okay, so number 4 then, I find this. We need to move on past 4 today, but man, you could talk about this for a long time with a lot of people. Is that the docking of the soul then? So the fractal is the soul, like this thing that we have but we don't see, right? Okay, is docking with the physical body. Okay, so this is the 4th thing. And you could think of this literally as it's docking with the embryo, the pre-existing embryo. And this is an interesting part. And I'm sure this is what people would discuss for hours and hours. I'm just going to move on to 5 right away. But it can dock at any moment during pregnancy, right? So in other words, there would be the physical body, whatever that would be starting, the physical existence starting, but the soul is not in there. And the soul could come and go
But what about
as it wanted to.
What about like can somebody be born then without that happening? Are there individual humans walking around that are soulless?
Well, a lot of people probably would say that people
Does that
are soulless.
explain Jeffrey Dahmer and
Yeah.
Trump? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I would say no.
That's a weird one.
Yeah, I would
But
say no.
but I would at least agree or at least assume that there's no preset specific developmental stage like when the zygote hits 64 cells the soul comes in like that's dumb.
Yeah, it's any time.
So
and I mean that just makes complete sense. If as a fractal,
that's so weird.
as a fractal being, right? There's this thing that again it exists, but yet we don't see it.
Yeah.
Right, and it's beyond what we are. I mean, it's
Well, but we
And-
see a definition of it in the context of our bodies, right? Because a soul can't occupy 17 different bodies, a rock and a fish at the same time, and sort of be
Maybe.
like, this
I
is
don't
us.
know.
Yeah, right.
I don't know.
All right.
Yeah, right.
See,
Well-
there needs to be like 3A, 4A, 4A.
Oh, yeah.
4B,
Well, I mean, that's the
4C.
thing, dude. It just could go on and
23
on.
is,
I mean,
not
some of
enough.
this. Yeah, it's amazing.
That's
well,
fantastic.
so the one thing, too, that will come up a lot in past life regression is that your soul, so, I mean, there would be, so you're part of the one big whole, and your soul then is still a fractal. It is a whole fractal, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that whole fractal does not have to all go into the physical body.
that's what I was gonna say. I
so
think
you could be part in, and so then
You could
that's
be a-
kind of like was Interstellar with
Yeah, when he was in 2 different times. basically.
because he's like talking to himself.
Yeah.
Then right, I mean,
Well,
he's
and-
helping himself.
That totally makes it okay for me.
Yep.
Like I think the idea that a soul. So what I was doing before is I was equating a fractal, a soul, and an individual. That's not necessarily the case.
Right.
That's totally cool. I can move on.
Yep. Okay. So
I don't have to. I mean,
That's a good one, though,
that
right?
eliminates the need to
Yeah.
break that down for me.
So number 5 is the actual birthing, then where the human being, takes their first breath. And this is interesting from the spiritual side because like ruach in, I think that's Hebrew, but I might be wrong, but it doesn't matter. But it's like the spirit of God, right? The spirit of it. Breath is synonymous with life,
yeah, right.
period, right? So you hear that like a lot. And so inspiratio probably is like to take spirit
Oh yeah,
in.
well yeah, to inspire is like to
yep.
take a breath, and
Yep.
respire
Yeah,
is
so that's
the process,
interesting.
and
Yeah.
expire is the...
So, yep. So then number 6, now this is where it gets that I think is not the arguments stop here. And this, although, I mean, you could still argue that the ego doesn't exist, but number 6 is the development of ego. And this happens approximately 8 months of age. Okay. And so before that, they're not distinguishing at all between self and mother.
Yeah, right.
At all.
Right.
Right. Okay. And now they're starting to develop their own identity. Okay.
Their skin defined.
Yeah. Right.
Separate.
And then this is what I would call the original separation. Okay. It's original sin where you've developed your ego. And so this is a developmental stage. And when you look at scriptures where, of course, people get into original sin and it has to do with sex and blah, blah, blah. Like, that's not it. You're missing the point. It's the original separateness that you're aware of, right? And even at this stage, they're not fully aware of it, but they're starting to demonstrate it, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So when a kid, before they're consciously deciding things and throws food, they're not bad.
Yeah, right.
They just threw food. That's what happened. They threw food. They're not bad.
I always say they're learning. But that's an interesting one because it suggests that it's, you can't, again, like sort of I was getting at earlier, you can't exist as an egoless individual. And if it's a sin to develop an ego, that's kind of weird because if you can't not do it, I guess it does. Then all of a sudden the Bible stories do make sense to say that, we sinned because we're human. We can't help it.
Yeah. So, but again, I think it just has to be interpreted because you have to be. So
right.
Ego
based
is
on premise.
Ego is what distinguishes you as a unique and separate entity from all other entities, right? And so you have to have that in order to experience it.
And again, so a soul or fractal could have multiple egos.
I'd say that's probably true.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be based on...
It's probably true. Yep. Okay, so then number 6, no, that was number 6. Number 7 is kind of becoming Homo erectus. We begin walking and we begin self-regulating ourselves. So this would be that stage in that simple 4-stage model where we went from just to self-awareness, just doing your own thing, into self-regulating. Now the kid could decide to throw food on purpose.
Right.
Basically, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to do this on purpose. Man, this gets a rise out of mom and dad.
I'm going to do it again.
So, yeah, right? Okay, so then number 8 is becoming Homo sapiens sapiens, developing speech, about 18 to 24 months. So, I mean, it's just a stage.
It's weird that
it's a stage.
I mean, I could have left off the scientific epithets or whatever. Like, why? But
well, I guess maybe I don't know this. We could try to ask him. Is it just a merging of the two, like the physical, what's going on physically and emotionally, spiritually, whatever? You know what I mean? Like trying that, something like that. Number 9 is going deeper into separation. So now this goes back. So this is where I would even, what I said about throwing food, this would be more of the stage where you're doing it purposely. You're going to use a whole lot more of like no, me, mine. It's I, me, mine,
you're
no.
really starting to focus on the cultural norms and applying the rules of the world that you see.
It's consciously undertaking the decision.
And maybe making up your own rules, I guess, too.
Yeah. Or certainly even the beginning outliers of challenging the rules, which I think would happen a little bit later, more puberty. But that would be
happens like with
the first
food
chance.
And stuff, too. But
Yeah. And, okay, so number 10 is beginning to think rationally. This is where you start equating rules and roles together. This is the chance development of egocentric to ethnocentric. You can start kind of seeing your place within the whole of your community, whatever that is, your family, your school, your community. You probably start becoming aware of your country, states, countries, and just like what you're taught in school, even, what I mean, and through this time. So you start. It's about age 7 is what he's saying is the kind of beginning side of this. It would certainly could go on higher than that or later, and it's not just what's good for you; it's what's good for the whole, right?
Yeah.
So you start developing some sense of that. Number 11 then is puberty, and so this is going to really be where we start challenging then these rules, right? Because you have these rules, these restraints, these laws. You see the sex urge is coming on super strong. And then we see the hypocrisy of that because we don't talk about this openly and honestly. We don't use correct terms with it. We pretend like it's so taboo.
Yeah, that's interesting because before that, your biological nature isn't really in conflict with your cultural nature.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden you've got the conflict because you have biological changes that, have all this rules.
Yeah.
All these rules associated with it. That's interesting.
Yeah. Number 12 is you develop like the ability to be self-reflective or self-reflection. So you start questioning your own journey, question your family and culture. You challenge the stories, whether they're historical, theological, or cosmological, the purpose of origin. All that really starts coming in.
What age was that? What did he say?
So it would be after puberty, so early teens,
and then
probably.
and then again at 50.
Yeah. Well, see, I think at any of these stage, you could get regressed.
Yeah,
not,
sure.
Not
or
regressed.
stuck.
You could get suppressed into one where you're not allowed to question, right? So that's super common in religion, where it's like, oh, all other religions are wrong, everything else is wrong. You don't read that stuff, don't think about that. That's colluding. Sure. Something with the devil, you know what I mean? Just by becoming aware. So you're not allowed to learn other things.
Well, it's kind of like what we said earlier. When you get your job and that's it.
Yeah.
You don't think anything else. You repeat for 40 years, and then we'll talk about that later.
So at this stage, this is where you could start developing the world-centric view of going, wait a minute. Yeah. There's more to it than just my family. What about, so I was born in the U.S. and my family tells me I'm Christian.
Yeah.
But what if I was born in India? My family probably tell me I'm Hindu,
Yeah.
Or,
Or it makes me uncomfortable when my dad talks about non-whites like he does.
Right. Yes, yeah. So you start, that's the chance for it. Number 13, I find this one is, maybe debatable, but is the first romantic relationship where now you're going to love some other person outside your family. And, whatever that means. And there's going to be like a degree of it hormonally pulled, right? Like you're just attracted physically because you just don't even understand that.
Yeah, but it is something that it wouldn't have come up
right
prior to some period where it's like all of a sudden it is a thing.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these could kind of be like, well, this might happen first, exactly, but a lot of them do just happen fairly chronological.
The way I interpret it is at this point, this becomes a possibility. Prior to this point, it doesn't occur very often, and so that's why we're kind of putting this arbitrary approximate time on it.
Exactly, yep. Number 14 is committed to a long-term relationship at some point, so you might be faithful to that relationship. Could it even last lifelong? I mean, I always appreciate stories like, we started dating when we were 13. I'm like, that's amazing. Like,
my parents.
That's amazing, yeah.
Choice, just choice.
Yep. So number 15 then is possibly getting into, so somewhere along here then we could be going typically junior high school, into college even, right? All of that can happen somewhere in that time frame, and I think different people, see, to me, I think I held on to what I've like dubbed as original innocence, like into my teens.
Oh yeah, I still think I have a lot of it. But in the form of like naivete and the refusal to sort of just believe that crazy things aren't possible.
Yeah.
Like I still want things to happen that probably are fantasies.
Possibly, but I mean that also I think of the fantasy of what is possible, of working together, 8 billion working together as opposed to 8 billion. Half and half.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like,
Yeah.
that seems like a childish fantasy, but maybe it's not.
So number 15, as far as this goes in this progression, is developing or getting into your profession. So you've gone from school to job, not just. So this is an interesting thing. Like we can do it not just to earn money, which we get forced into, but it should be to contribute to the world.
Yeah.
Right? Is the problem.
Yeah.
And this is also a good potential stage of regression.
Right.
At this point, I mean, you might get more caught up in yourself, or certainly your family or what you're doing. Number 16, super chance of regression here is you become a parent. Like your first child, could be an animal though, even, right? You know what I mean? Where you have something more to take care of beyond it. I mean, so you might have had a family pet or whatever, but let's just face it, kids usually don't have full responsibility of that.
Yeah, no, it's like a new energetic expense.
Yeah. And so this is a transfer of it's the transfer of the object of your love. So you might have first had your spouse, right, which is your love, and now I think this happens probably a lot. I can't speak to this because I don't have kids, and you might be able to. But where it's like, well, you love the spouse, and now you've had this child, and now you have this new child that is occupying so much of the time or space or love, and you hear parents say things, I can't imagine ever loving anything as much, which pretty much then cancels the spouse out, if that is true.
There
she is. Come on in, Ran.
Wait, are you upstairs?
Where are you?
I think she talking through the tub.
That's awesome.
Well, speaking of love for kids,
yes.
But yeah, that is a very interesting. Well, keep going. I'll save some comments to the end, probably.
No, well, go ahead on that. I mean,
I just find it almost odd that we went pretty dramatically from talking about, really, I guess, a transition from being much more aware. Maybe not as you're in the stage, but as we're talking about the stages, like it starts off very one big holy.
Yep.
And we're slowly separating from that. And now it's come to this like almost exponential fine point where that's gone. And the only thing that we're really focused on is this extremely narrow, to talk about loving relationships, is that an extreme subset, extremely focused point within the one big whole, or is it not? Like, am I looking at this wrong?
I think that's kind of the cultural conditioning of it, though, right? So you come in as your one big, and kids are very connected to the one big whole. Even, so a kid could easily have an imaginary friend, right? Is it imaginary, or is it right. I mean, I don't know. Right. You know what I mean?
The brain's crazy. Yeah.
So that's totally possible there. And I think where it says once you've lost that original innocence, I almost wonder is if when you have you come in with original innocence, it starts getting. You start losing. You create your ego.
Yeah, it's reduced. Trading it for
right. It's reduced because of the conditioning. Right. This is right. This is wrong. No. Good boy. Bad boy. Blah blah blah. Whatever the case may be on stuff like that. And then it maybe is the final nail, or if not, certainly one of the last nails is when the child no longer believes in Santa Claus, because that's like the last, official kind of innocence thing that they have going back.
Then, and then maybe this is the pivot we're doing now. Is it seems like it's more like a bow tie, right? Where you're focus more on the ego, I guess, or living more in the ego, putting more energy toward egocentric things, and then you kind of go, ideally. Oh,
yep.
Well, wait a minute.
I think that's
I forgot something.
Yep.
And then you.
I think the bow tie is a great metaphor. Well, I think you're always called towards that, back, right? Okay,
Well, yeah, and so maybe like we've created this narrowing
Oh yeah,
artificially
yeah.
through
Well, that's the
cultural-
ego. That's the collective ego power together of narrowing and narrowing and narrowing. Because I'm the ego, I'm coming down, and so you come down to this. So we're definitely the regression is possible, and then. And I mean, see, this is why he has 23 because it's like
No, it's, like I said, now I think there should be more.
right. Yeah.
My first thought was
Sean,
just way
forget
too
this
many.
23. We're going up to 100. Yeah, right. So, so you have this child, children, right? Whatever you have, they become very your focus, right, for a long time, and probably to your point, right. So you started here whole, and it's narrowing down, and now all of the things that are so close to you are occupying all of your time that you don't even have time to think about that whole anymore.
Yeah,
barely.
right.
And that's why then a lot of people go to church on Sunday because it's like they kind of, or a lot of people just feel like they should.
Yeah,
Right,
but I mean,
okay, so-
to be reminded
Yeah,
of these things
and
that we don't.
but that's what would be ideally,
Yeah.
right? Is to give, and that would be the whole actual idea of like a day of Sabbath, right? Is like, listen, you're alive and you're a human, and you got a lot of responsibilities, right? And you got to do it. You got to. You got family and your job, and you got to provide. You got to eat. You got Maslow's hierarchies of needs, which we made an image of. So you do all that. So now at some point then you're going to, a next stage could be the first grandchild.
Yeah.
And now the expansion is starting to go back out for sure, if it hasn't gone already.
Right,
Now,
right.
I think, so for you of course still have Ren at 6, but your other children are older, right? So you were having time to start going out. And again, it's like you talk about this like at high school. It's like this is what you were interested in going into college. Like you were interested in
Well,
that.
yeah, for me, the resolution is that, I mean, it's selfish, but I can remember what I was like at those points in time, see how they're like at those points in time, and then sort of use those as reminders of where I've been and where I'm going. And instead of looking at this continuum as just a point of where I would be, I have these other points of resolution that sort of force me to see it as more of a big picture. And yeah, that makes it widen up.
Well,
open
and
up
so
again.
you think about this, like a lot of times, like an older generation can be like, oh, well, you're too idealistic, or you're living, in a, that's a utopian dream kind of thing, right?
Yeah, Fantasyland.
Yeah, Fantasyland. And so when you start developing that back to the self-reflection stage that he calls 12, where it's a world-centric view, and you're like, man,
Yeah.
I want everybody, we're going to take care of people. I want to make the world a better
Yeah,
place,
yeah.
blah, blah, blah. And then because of conditioning, though, and this, this is related to the school loan problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like you went to school for something you were passionate about, but you actually can't get a job in that, and people make fun of that. It's like, well, that's a crying shame.
Well, and people say, yeah. So it's your
like,
fault.
well, like it's your fault. It's like, well, this is what I'm passionate about, and we need these things.
Yeah.
So, anyways, the expansion starts happening potentially at a grandchild. Obviously, it can happen at other times, but this becomes the embrace of like the entire planet. Which again, I think you had. There's the special guest star.
Hi, Ren.
There she is. What's going on, Ren?
Yeah, and that's it.
That's it, and you're done.
Don't lose your train of thought.
And it's all, so we're talking about the embrace of the entire planet, typically older, but it's the embrace of all the life forms and stuff. And again, I think what happens though, because a lot of people probably are like 21 listening to this, all 10 of the 21-year-olds listening to this in the world of 8 billion, are saying, but I care about the whole planet. Well, you do.
Yeah.
You do. And then that's going to get beat out of you.
Well, no,
Because-
that's the exact thing happened to me when I was a
Yeah.
grad student. Talking about what I wanted to do with my career, I'd just look around and see all my professors just like rolling their eyes and laughing. And then, I actually approached my major professor about this, and I'm like, "What's the deal?" He's like, "Look, we all felt like you."
Yep.
And then, life happens.
Yep. You're ready, and life happens. And then I think, and so for a lot of people, and we talked about this one time, a long time ago, somebody asked me, why do, I never responded to him on Facebook, but this will be the second time I've responded to him now. So why do typically older people, does it take like into the 40s, 50s, 60s to like go back and start reading scriptures or kind of reconnecting? It's like, because you had time. because that's when you had
Yeah.
time. Because you were raising your kid, you were going to your
Yeah.
job, you're trying to play this game, right or wrong. That's a whole 10 other episodes.
Well, and I would argue that you always had time. You just had the pressures of
Yes.
whatever the thing is
Yes.
that narrows us.
Yes. Yes.
Saying you don't.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
you have
these
to do
demands,
these other
these
things.
things. Well, now, like we've talked about this, like with parents and kids doing travel ball all year, and it's just like, no. How about no?
Yeah.
Like, mix it up. Play different sports. You don't need to travel. Your kid's not going to be pro, most likely. I will take. Here's a bet. Every parent out there right now that thinks their kid's going to go pro, I'll bet you $100 they don't.
Oh yeah, totally. Although I have noticed that there are a handful, because I know of the kids because I have kids that age that have gotten scholarships to college because they were mediocre, whatever players, and so that's not and I think and all of a sudden I go, maybe that's what the parents wanted.
Yeah,
They thought in doing all this stuff was going to save them $100,000.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the scholarship thing's interesting too because that's just part of the whole BS of how expensive school is to begin with, right? Hey, we're going to knock this $50,000 off, but you're still paying us $100. All right. Anyways, back to the list because we're almost done to the first 20. Number 19 then is what Sean calls the dawning of enlightenment. And this would be, first of all, within a single incarnation on Earth, okay, which a lot of people say, well, there's only
one round.
Yep, well, there's one round. And it's important to understand, though, that enlightenment, this is my important takeaway to this, though, is he uses a term, it's not an on-off switch. I like to compare it to education where you don't get finished. It's never ending.
It's a process.
It's a degree. It's a process. It goes on.
Yeah,
Somebody,
it's a practice.
Yes, it's
like
a practice.
We said last time.
And you can, if you were enlightened at 20, which you might have been completely, but then you have the rest of your life to practice it, and so if you don't, then you weren't.
Yeah, and you're going to forget it to varying degrees and become more... You're still enlightened, but you're more or less not doing a good job at it. So does that still apply, like we said, I think last week, about recognizing that you are an ego, but yet you're also the one big whole? Isn't that the point? What do we call? Did you call that enlightenment last week?
Well,
what is that point? No, that's the second coming.
Yes, yeah. That's the second coming, is recognizing your ego and overcoming your ego.
Right, yeah,
That's
or at least, again,
coming.
the same thing that we just said. We're practicing overcoming. We don't actually achieve it on a permanent basis.
And then finally, number 20 is just the death of the physical body, and now you're transitioning from one form, so to speak, back to whatever that means. Mm-hmm. We don't know.
Isn't it Alan Watts that said, I'm not a human having a spiritual experience, I'm a spirit having a human experience?
I think there's that quote has been given to 50 people. I don't know what I have done with my notes on the last three, but the key to the last three is the idea that there's more than one lifetime. Right, and so there would be a greater whole. So one would be the chance to come back, period, to do this again. And so, and I just think that would be from that standpoint. So first of all, that would be a big conversation about linear time, because linear time on Earth is the only place that linear time on Earth works. Mm-hmm. Right? Anything else is going to be a different time. That's why, in Interstellar, again, not that that's what we're talking about mainly here, but that's...
Well, that was the best representation of any non-linear time I think I've ever read, seen, heard.
Yeah. So that's an interesting aspect there that, it could be all happening simultaneously, basically.
Yeah, they're just, if you think about it, again, I look for models that exist in nature that would explain the things that we see. And the way we think an atom works is all these particles just moving around, appearing and reappearing in some random order in space. Why would not our existence follow a similar pattern where it just pops in and out of not according to any time and direction, any of it.
Right. Yeah, totally. It just makes a lot of sense, that it's just more complicated. And so that makes what reincarnation, we think of it such as a literal thing, but you've talked about it with the DNA being that the memories are stored within the DNA.
I mean, I think our systems that we can observe, which are far fewer than the ones we can't, sort of do lend themselves well to this idea. The problem is, like religion, like you said something earlier that made me think of it. Like you get to go back and do it again. It's like that's not exactly, it's not like that.
Yeah,
it's more like,
Yeah.
So the way we think about reincarnation is what's making it weird.
Yes,
It's not the
and that's I like the way you said that the systems that are observable. Mm-hmm. Right. Versus all the stuff that are not observable.
And again, like I said last week, why would these other things that we can't observe not follow? So like the dendritic pattern we were talking about that repeats itself in rivers and lungs and trees and all that. Why would these other patterns not repeat themselves at these other levels?
Right.
I mean, that's usually parsimony, right? The simplest explanation is probably the right one, or Occam's razor.
And so, and then the last two really would be the kind of bodhisattva idea that you as the soul are going to purposely choose to reincarnate in order to help others.
Wow.
Right? Like
right?
Like even though you could, and so the last one would be full dock back with hole. You are again just the one big hole again.
But then you're not helping.
You're not helping. But so you can go, well, I could do this. I'll go back in.
That's cool. And I don't know if we've ever mentioned this, but I was listening to the psychology podcast by a guy named Scott something. It's the most listened to podcast in psychology. And he talks, his mentor, I think, one of his professors was Maslow.
Okay.
And he said toward the end of his life, he actually added that level.
Self-actualization.
No, it was one more of the giving back thing.
Oh, yeah,
In order to really complete the cycle, you have to make a conscious decision to then go back into the system and try to elevate everybody else.
Yes. Well, and that probably should be that's what the Bodhisattva vow is then. But I think that also can happen within the first 20 without the reincarnation part.
Right. Or it could happen by completely allowing yourself to absorb into the one big hole, and you may figure out some way to do it that's not quite so literal.
Yeah. And again, that's where it comes into the punching down thing. You're not it is if you have obtained to a higher knowledge, wisdom, level, whatever you want to call it. If you've attained a higher something knowledge, you can't attack somebody else, or you're not as high as you think you are.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty obvious when you say it like that. Yeah. And then when what I do is when I find myself in that moment, not only do I realize that I'm not quite as advanced as I thought I was, but also that I'm in the ego and I'm not doing all these things and I'm not being mindful.
Right.
I totally. Right. But then I immediately forgive myself because it's a practice.
Right, and that's the awareness then, because that's what you have to just go back to constantly, because that's your awareness of your thoughts. You've identified that your thoughts weren't pure, whatever you want to call that.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Yeah, right. I wasn't quite in the space that I thought I was.
Yeah, and so and at least then if you have, and I'm not sure that you can eliminate the ego thoughts completely.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? And have
I almost don't think you want to, because they're what provides the opportunities for the reminders. Without the reminders of the one big hole, we would narrow ourselves into, the most selfish, greedy bastards, and Idi Amin or whatever kind of dictator, fascists, because we don't have those reminders. It's almost it's almost worse to live a life where you're not reminded of your idiocy, or if you will, because that's what keeps you moving forward. Presents the challenges.
Well, and I think so. A couple of ways to think about. One is and believe me, man, I get especially say driving, right, is a great place where you're what is this idiot doing?
Getting cut off in traffic is the best example of of this.
And it's okay, well. So, almost the pattern of that is first I realized, especially as I watched my father get older and slow down driving and not be able to do good.
I did the same thing.
And it was okay, if that was my father.
Totally, same exact.
I'd have a lot of sympathy. Mm-hmm. So, I should for that person. And beyond that person is a soul fractal just like me. Mm-hmm. And whatever it is they're dealing with is, that's what they're dealing with, right? So there's that aspect. And then the other thing keeping in mind, and I think that, they're so close together really, is that every act is the act of love or it's a cry or a call for love. So somebody that is not acting purely like it's love, and that's not just like this, goofy, hippie, like woo-woo thing. Yeah, like love everybody. And an action out of love could certainly almost just be argued that, well, that's just a neutral action. Fair enough.
Yeah,
fair enough.
But it's not harmful.
Yeah, it's not harmful in a way. It's not acting out. It's not doing whatever. And so somebody that is acting out or calling for love or a cry for love, it's not necessarily, well, clearly, it's not a literal cry. But you have to identify that, like, okay, well, what they're hurting for whatever reason. They're not seeing, they're not connected into this. They're not reversing the roles. They're not being able to see the other perspective and stuff like that. And again, as you've said over and over and over again, it's a practice, and you have opportunity after opportunity over and over and over all day long to do that.
Yeah. And something I just thought of when you said that is it's not selfish then to not help that, to not answer that. You can answer that cry for love by recognizing it and doing something about yourself. You may not be able to go and console that individual in the car, but which is interesting for me because, I think about selfishness a lot. Like, is self-help selfish? Like, is that egotistical to want to think of myself and try to change? But in this case, it's like you're making a contribution to the one big whole by bettering you're practicing these.
Right, because you can only control your actions.
Yeah.
So what you can only control on your end, so you don't, you would need to just demonstrate your love, your patience, your compassion, your empathy, whatever, in the best way possible, right?
Yeah, but again, you don't have to save the world.
Yes.
And because I think that's a point where people give up. They're like, well, I can't solve everybody's problems, and so why do I care?
Yep.
But what you can do is that, and in doing that thing for yourself, you are actually making a bigger contribution to the world.
Right, and that's all you can do. Do you want to, so we're almost at an hour. Good job out of us.
Yeah, well, not very nice. That was nothing.
And do you want to next week kind of talk? I think you've talked on your podcast about this previously on Knowledge Plus Experience Equals Wisdom. Definition of success?
Probably. I have to go back and look, but I definitely think that's worthy.
But that would be cool because you brought that up today about like Elon Musk and whoever else,
Well, yeah, this hero worship thing is just it's gotta stop. We value the wrong traits.
I like that.
Just like we elect the wrong politicians.
Sure.
Why you elect greedy, power hungry people, and they behave the way they do, and we're surprised.
Right.
Like I said, Mr. Rogers for president.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, that'd be great. That'd be a great topic.
Is that on the table? Right. Fred Rogers.
No, unfortunately.
Yeah, Fred Rogers and Winnie the Pooh. So.
Yeah. That was good, man.
Cool.
Thanks for doing the work. Heavy lifting on that one.
That was all good. That was fun.
And I think